And we're going to do just a real quick summary of what we were doing yesterday before we start our story. And we're just going to kind of do the summary at the end piece. We are outside the Dursleys' home, and the Dursleys are related to the Potters. And even though the Dursleys don't want to admit it, they don't like the Potters and they don't want anybody to know about them. But Mr. Dursley had heard some upsetting kind of pieces of conversation earlier in the day about the Potters and Harry, and he started thinking, that's my nephew's name. And when he got home that afternoon, he was listening to the news, and the news was telling about some unusual things that had gone in the city that day. And so as he was going to bed, he was thinking, it's going to be all right. He wasn't going to be worried about it. So outside of his house that night, there was a cat that had been there all day long. And the cat was waiting for something. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a man appeared. And when he saw the cat, he just kind of chuckled. And then the cat turned into a lady, Miss McGonagall. And as they're talking about the Potters and what happened through the day, Mr. Dumbledore told her that he had decided to leave the Potter's young son with the Dursleys, and she just can't believe that he would do that because she feels like they're not the best kind of people. So that's where we are beginning. A big giant kind of man shows up with a little tiny baby, and here we go. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. And he bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James are dead, and poor little Harry off to live with muggles. Yes, it's all very sad, but get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. And for a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook, Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Dumbledore finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'd best get this back away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. And with a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. And Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. And Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. And on the corner he stopped and took out the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. Well, a breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Miss Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures, what looked like a large pink beach ball, wearing different colored bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby. And now the photograph showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice which made the first noise of the day. "Up! Get up! Now!" Harry woke with a start, and his aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walking toward the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he'd been having. It was a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it, and he had a funny feeling he had had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon, and don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Dudley's birthday." And Harry groaned. "What did you say?" His aunt snapped through the door. "Nothing, nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten?" And Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed and, after pulling a spider off one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them. And that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had got the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard. But Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. So Harry had a thin face and knobbly knees and black hair and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. In the car crash when your parents died, she had said. And don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dudleys, or the Dursleys. Well, Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked by way of morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Well, Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Well, Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents, and his face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. "That's two less than last year." "Darling, you haven't counted Aunt Marge's present. See, it's here under this big one from Mummy and Daddy." "All right, 37 then," said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Pumpkin? 2 more presents, is that all right?" Well, Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. And finally, he said slowly, "So I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh," and Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right, then." Well, Uncle Vernon chuckled. "Little Tyke wants his money worth just like his father. Atta boy, Dudley." And he ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike. A Cine camera, a remote control airplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Miss Figgs broke her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction, and Dudley's mouth fell open in horror. But Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Miss Figg, a mad old lady who lives 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Miss Figgs made him look at photographs of all the cats that she'd ever owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he had planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Miss Figgs had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "Well, we could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." Well, the Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that they couldn't understand them like a slug. "What about what's-her-name, your friend Yvonne?" "On holiday," snapped Aunt Petunia. "Well, you could just leave me here," Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. "And come back and find the house in ruins?" she snarled. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and leave him in the car. That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone. Well, Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Dinky Dum-Dums, don't cry. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. And he shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Well, just then the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Palkus, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. And Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Well, half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. I'm warning you, he had said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in the cupboard from now until Christmas. Well, I'm not going to do anything, said Harry, honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't mean make them happen. Why, once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald, except for his fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotaped glasses. By next morning, however, he'd got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before. Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange baubles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and, to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual, when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress, telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings, but all he had tried to do was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Miss Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. So that's where we're going to stop today. And we're going to pick up tomorrow where Harry actually ends up at the zoo. Have a good day.